Club. He is the grandson of Mamie Todd, who died last year at the age of 105. She was an outspoken civil rights activist who worked as a social worker led to Maryland's Child Protective Service Agency. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. The new book, Never Forget Our People Were Always Free.
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them and are not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Today is Tuesday, January 10th, 2023. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. We are reshaping, reinventing this process, this concept, the program. Our name was Conversations with Al McFarlane. We now call it The Conversation. That's what we intend to do, what we intend to be. And we are starting off the new series in 2023 with what we're calling Hot Topics, and I have one or two things I want to share with you in that vein. But today's program, after the Hot Topics, will focus on the demographic shift in the population of Minnesota and what that means for workforce development here in Twin Cities and around our state for our future. I'm pleased to have the state demographer on board and also a friend and leader and elder co-worker in the area of workforce, Brother Lewis King. Susan Brower is with Minnesota. She's the demographer. Lewis King heads SAOIC, Summit Academy OIC. He's also head of the National OIC movement. We'll come back to them momentarily. Let me begin with what I'm calling our new hot topics. And the first thing I want to bring our attention to is just the great news at the state legislature. Bobby Joe Champion, we said yesterday, announced as the new president of the Minnesota State Senate. Unprecedented, a new thing, a great thing. But along with that, this is the largest class of Black and communities of color legislators in the history of the state of Minnesota. And I go to Twitter to look at some of the information regarding this significant attainment. Twitter, Ruth Richardson, who's in the House, says that this is making history in Minnesota because it is the largest United Black Legislative Caucus contingent ever in the history of the state. She says we're breaking down barriers to build a stronger state. And she says, in the words of Nina Simone, it's a new dawn, it's a new day, and I'm feeling good. So I've got the image of those legislators on the screen. I'll share some other comments by a couple of these new legislators. One is, she's not new, she's returning, Hodan Hassan. She says, she is a Minnesota lawmaker who fights racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, and she's chair of the Economic Development Committee in the House of Representatives. Another legislator who tweeted around this event was Mary Frances Clardy. She described herself as a mom, an educator, a disability advocate, and representative-elect. Now she's representing District 53A. And so kudos to them and kudos to us, all the voters. I'm going to look at some of the other comments that I saw, tweets around this significant achievement. Maya Washington said, we're rooting for all of you and for Minnesota. Thank you for your service. Linda Higgins, a Northsider, she was the one that preceded Representative, then Senator Bobby Joe Champion in the Senate. And she just tweeted a like out supporting and bragging on Bobby Joe as representing District 59. A lot of comments. Chris Foreman saying simply excellent, and others. So listen, think about what it means for us, what it means for our community. To me, I remember when I first started Inside News back in 1974. The challenge was that political people and business people thought that we were so few in number, meaning Black people in particular and people of color, that our numbers and our interests were insignificant and therefore inconsequential. So young Al McFarlane goes knocking door to door asking both government agencies and businesses and corporations to advertise to reach Black people in my newspaper. And basically they laughed me out of the room. They'd say, listen, McFarlane, we gave in church on Sunday. Get out of here. They viewed our business proposition, the creation of Inside News, as charity, not as business. What we are happy to report now is that on our own volition and with our own increase in size and breadth and depth, sophistication and engagement as a people, as Black people, we have determined and have delivered on the promise that we must be recognized. Our presence is real. Our power is real. Our needs are real. And we demand the right to navigate, to negotiate, and to be partners, co-equal partners in the creation of futures. And the futures we create, the narratives that describe those are narratives and futures in which we emerge as winners. Well, that's our hot topic today. I have more, but we'll move because I'll go on and on and on. Kudos to all of those who have been elected to the United Legislative Black Caucus. Let me say their names. Representative Esther Agbaje represents my district here in North Minneapolis. I've got to make my screen bigger so I can read their names more easily. And also, as we mentioned, Senator Bobby Joe Champion, now President of the Senate. Representative Mary Frances Clardy represents District 65A in St. Paul, and Senator Omar Farah, I think it is, I might be reading it wrong, represents South Minneapolis. Representative Chadwick Frazier, District 43A, and Representative, I'm having a difficult time reading small type on my screen. I'll come back to it. Let's see. Then, you know what? I have too much of a challenge here. I'm going to make my screen bigger. Hold on one second. I can do this. There we go. All right. Now, so Representative Athena Hollins represents District 66B. Representative Hodan Hassan, 62B. Representative Samakab Hussein represents 65A. Senator Erin May Quaid, great story, great leader in the Senate representing District 56. Her colleague, a newcomer, a young person, a superstar on the ascent, and that's Senator Zainab Mohammed representing District 63. And our friend, this may be a second or third term returning to the State House of Representatives, Representative Mohammed Noor. And finally, Senator, I mentioned earlier, Representative Ruth Richardson serving 52B. And finally, Senator Claire Omo Verbeeten representing District 66. 3 Black women in the Senate joining, I think, 2 Black men in the Senate. Unprecedented. And the beauty of it is led by Senator Bobby Joe Champion, selected president of the Minnesota Senate. And together, a powerful group. I think if you add this group to the other people of color elected, Asian, Latino, Native, the multicultural caucus, there's a name for it, but that number hits almost 40 people. 40 people on one accord means a block of power, and it's a block of power that we haven't had before. And think about it this way. We just watched what happened with the ultra right wing in the Republican Party that was live on TV, how they were able to wrangle from the intended Speaker of the House concessions. Well, think of what 40 can do in shaping and directing opportunity for our people here in Minnesota. Well, that's my hot topic. Hope you enjoyed that. Again, we'll keep that format. I'd love to hear what you think we ought to be doing, topics you think we should deal with and express in the course of this program as we go down the road. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Again, I want to thank my colleagues here at KFAI. This radio station, amazing because it reaches so many people directly through the broadcast and directly as well through the digital. And I want to thank our collaborating platforms as well. We are streaming live on the Insight YouTube channel. We're streaming live on LinkedIn for Insight. We're streaming live on Twitter and on Facebook. We also partner with the Black Press of America, NNPA, at Black Press USA. This program is carried every day through the national platform of Black Press USA, also on their Facebook page. So we're doing a lot of stuff. I see a note here of greetings from Maestre Yogi Sena, who is our editor and contributor, who joins us often, regularly from Bahia in Brazil. And through him, we keep connected with the evolution of opportunity, of identity, of shared values and strategies of Black people throughout the diaspora, North America, Central America, South America, and we connect with our Africanity. The idea is what our duty, our obligation, our opportunity is to make change, not only in our personal lives, but in the lives of every human being on the planet, certainly all of our people, and our contribution to civility, to humanity, to growth, and the expansion of knowledge, of power, of resources, and fairness and justice throughout the world. Well, let me bring this back and bring in my guests today. And as I mentioned earlier, my guests include Susan Brower. Susan Brower is the state demographer, and my guest is my friend and colleague, a business leader, both in Minneapolis in the state of Minnesota, but also in the country. Louis King, he's president of Summit Academy OIC and president of the OICs of America. Let's bring them both in. Susan, Louis, good morning, Happy New Year. Good afternoon, Happy New Year, and welcome to the conversation. Susan, let me begin with you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you. Give us a profile, Susan Brower. How does Minnesota look right now?
Sure. So we just took a census. It may not feel like it to some of you, but we're just getting the data back from the 2020 census now, and that's giving us an updated profile of what the state looks like. Today, about 1.3 million Minnesotans are BIPOC, belong to a BIPOC community. That means they filled out their census form and checked that they were Black, Indigenous, Asian, Hispanic, or Latino. So that's 1.3 million. That's almost 25% of the state's population. So almost a quarter. The exact number is 23.7. For Black or African American Minnesotans, that number is just under 400,000. If you consider the people who are Black alone, they check just one box. It's 392,000 people. If you look at people who are Black and also another race, it's close to 500,000. So that's a number that really just continued to grow very, very rapidly over the last 10 years. And that happened while the white non-Hispanic population actually began to decline. So we really needed that growth. It came just at the right time when our state's population historically, which has relied on kind of growth from the white non-Hispanic population, that really is a thing of the past. And we expect most of the growth in the future to come from populations of color.
Where do you see in the future? Is there a leveling, or is it constant change and constant demographic shift for the next 100 years? I mean, look at 100 years ago and 100 years out. What's the trajectory say?
Well, in terms of our racial makeup and our racial diversity, we'll continue to become more diverse as a state. And that's in part due to the fact that it's built into our age structure. So as we get younger and younger, we get more and more larger and larger shares of populations of color. So our most diverse age group is our youngest age group. That means that as that group ages into the parenting ages, they'll have their own children of color, and that is the momentum toward greater diversity that comes kind of from who already is, from the people who are already living here in the state. There's this own kind of central momentum toward greater diversity. In addition to that, it's likely that we will need ongoing migration from other states, immigration from across the globe, and that will serve to increase diversity as well.
So when you say identify young people as kind of the driving force for the future, how does diversity look in the young population? Are you talking about under 12, under 18, or you look at all the categories?
Yeah, well, it just gets increasingly more diverse as you go younger and younger. So if we looked at our youngest population, 0 to 4, it's about 1/3, about 34% of that population are children of color. And that's a number that we expect to continue to keep increasing as time goes on and as parents themselves become more diverse.
So that means that there is a time you can pinpoint when people of color will no longer be the quote unquote minority. And we probably are at a point where white people are approaching not being the majority, but part of a plurality. So the trend here is going from absolute numerical majority and absolute numerical minorities to shrinking white populations, growing populations that are BIPOC. And at some point in time, the numbers mean that no one particular group is eligible to be defined as the majority, and that all of us are plurality players. What does that mean? Is that the right way to look at this thing in the process for the change and the shift?
Is it the right way? It's one way. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. You know, I guess when I look at the diversity of our state, the shorthand is to kind of look at populations of color as one group. And in some ways, you know, there are a lot of commonalities with respect to experience, but in many other ways, there's just such diversity among not just, and you know this well, not just populations of color, but within the Black or African American community as well, just a great range of experience, you know, culturally in terms of, you know, where their roots are from, you know, all kinds of diversity linguistically. So I guess it's maybe a simplification to say that is a major milestone, that tipping point, but you know, we're on that road and we're already seeing changes, as your intro showed, that we're seeing more and more people of color kind of rise to positions of power. We're seeing that today, even before that milestone is met. And I think as we continue to become more diverse, we will see more of those changes that we've begun to see with this last legislative session.
I'm Al McFarlane. You're listening to the conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm talking with Susan Brower. She's Minnesota's state demographer. And, you know, the question of how change occurs is fascinating, and the implications of it fascinating as well. It's fascinating to me, Susan, because as an African American, I call myself a New World African. I have always sort of seen myself as an outsider in the arena of power, but my intent has always to figure out how I emerge as my full, authentic, and powerful self. Powerful in the sense that I believe that every human being, all of my neighbors, no matter where they come from, have and deserve to be seen in the light of their personal power. Their existence in itself is sacred, right? And so how do we value every human being, and how do we avoid systems, shorthand, structures, plans, policies that minimize the value of life of certain of those among us? We have been on the minimized end in the American experiment that we call democracy. But thank God, I believe, and Lewis, you'll jump in here, we've been propelled by guided by, and successful in forcing this country, our people, to confront inequity, inequality, and the discrepancies in what we profess and what we do. And our commitment has been to keep moving both ourselves and therefore society along the arc towards equality and justice. Louis King, jump in the conversation. Brother, how you doing?
Really well. How are you, sir? Happy New Year. It's good to see you. COVID has kind of slowed us down, but it's redefined the world, and I'm excited about the opportunities. I would like to add one thing about my title. In September, I took over OIC of America full-time and left Summit behind after 20 plus years. I'm now fully responsible for the 25 affiliates in 19 states. And what I'll tell you, and I've traveled from Portland to South Florida to Connecticut to Phoenix to Monroe, Louisiana, Wilson, North Carolina. We are not alone. All right. This thing is going on, and it's a very exciting time to be part of the journey in this country. It's good to see the Demographer. We've been on stage a lot. I've been a fan for years, paid attention to her for years. A lot of people don't pay attention to the number of bodies on the planet, but people make the world go around. All right. And for what I do, and I'm part of this emancipation work that you describe, modern day freedom fighters. We live in a capitalist democracy that has three factors of production: land, labor, and capital. You might add a fourth, technology, but people lose sight of that. We're now in a labor shortage. This is the third major labor shortage in this country. The last one was 1916 as we moved from agrarian to manufacturing, and it led to the Great Migration and the birth of the middle class. We'll get back to that. The first one led to slavery. And that was all about labor. They didn't have enough people to work the land that they'd taken. So there you have it. And unwittingly, they set up the epic journey of African Americans to get us to where we are now, and a continuous struggle for us to help uphold the promises of the pursuit of happiness, right? So when I look at African Americans, and I agree with Susan, when you get ethnic groups in the same room, they might have a common cause, but they have different identities. Because they have different identities, they have different politics. And their different politics then lead to sometimes them not being able to come together on resources. And so when they lump everyone together, it is not exactly as what it appears on the surface. So my perspective is that of African American, open arms to everybody, but this is our journey. So where are we right now? We have a certain paradox in front of us, in fact, that we have more economic opportunity in front of us, probably, and because of technology, than we ever had. And yet we still kind of exist in a Juneteenth moment. And what do I mean by that? The market is brutal. If you don't have people, you cannot produce a product and you cannot deliver a service. So you saw my work in the construction industry 20 years ago, and we kept telling them, hey, you're going to run out of Swenson and Johnsons. Nobody believed me. A human beings always go, that won't happen to me. It'll happen to somebody else. We always do that. It can't be me. I don't have COVID. I'll never get it. The pandemic won't shut the whole world down. Oops, right? So here we are today, and major construction projects are being delayed because they can't get enough people. Therefore, people that you used to screen out, you now need them. But the problem is the social barriers that you built or excluded people from, the education levels that they need to perform, now stand in the way of you getting to them, which then means there's opportunities for people in my business to close the gap. You saw in Star Tribune last week, the income gap has closed, not because of equity efforts, not because of DEI, Mother Nature and the marketplace, supply and demand.
Break
It's
it
really
down. Break it down. Good point. Let's sit on that for a minute. Go into that, Lewis.
So here's the play. You and I remember at the end of the civil rights movement, all of the moves for affirmative action and EEO. Okay, we're 50 years into that operation. How many Black CEOs do you have, Fortune 500 companies, or anybody in the C-suite, right? How many investment bankers? I mean, less than 1% of mortgage bankers out there are loan officers are African Americans. So much for affirmative action, right? The consciousness comes and goes. We have that today with DEI as well. Everybody's got a title, everybody's got a job. I get it. But when you look back 100 years ago, when they were going from agrarian to manufacturing and didn't have enough people to man the factories, and Black folks left the South overwhelmingly to take those jobs, that created the Black middle class. No act of Congress, no act of altruism, none of that, pure market. And
Henry Ford in Detroit.
And there were no Black leaders. It was your cousin and your relative who went north, came back and got you. And so the ant trail got formed, and suddenly you had it in masses. And by 1954, Brown v. Topeka, Kansas, 65 Voting Rights Act, and within 43 years, Barack Obama. That's the game, Doc. All right. Today, they rolled back all the tides, flooded the community with drugs. We got the incarceration thing going. I was disheartened to find out that by the age of 23, 47% of Black men have been arrested. Setting the stage for them to go on and become felons, which means they can't get employed. And if you can't get employed as a father of 3 daughters, you're poor marriage material, hence the issue that we see on the streets. You take all of that, you take a 30% drop in birth rates. Boomers like myself who wake up every day thinking about retiring, look at this conversation we're having with you right now and think about that pre-pandemic. The pandemic sped everything up. So now you got DoorDash, Instacart, Amazon, ways of thinking about the world have changed. Sears is gone, all right? So there's an opportunity here that is structural in nature. I'm watching the immigration thing as well, right? We need those workers. We really, 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 really do.
Well, what do you make, Lewis? Thanks for bringing that point up. But what do you make of the current conversation about particularizing how we treat the people at the border from Venezuela, Haiti, I think Colombia, and another country that has, in my view, a high Afro population? Where is the question of the colonial mentality showing up even in this question of immigration? Also,
unfortunately, the politics of immigration are not rational at all. All right. So it's hard for me to even separate, because first of all, let me put this out there for everybody that's listening. I can't just go barging into Canada. I'm an oppressed Black man. I got it tough here. I don't like it. I got to go through a process. Any country in the world, you have to go through a process. And I think that we need a process here that accommodates people. But gee whiz, I don't know that the system we have can sustain the assault that it's under, the sheer number of bodies. And then you throw in the politics. Without going down that rabbit hole, I will say this. If I was the mayor of Washington, D.C. or Martha's Vineyard or wherever they're sending those people, I send the governors of Florida and Texas a dozen roses, all right? Because those people are going to become workers. Their children are going to become workers. They're going to become taxpayers, and my state is going to pass your state. Goodbye, all right? You'll stay there in the Stone Age. But for those of us who are in charge of the African-American journey, we have to be very clear about the opportunity and the challenges.
Yep.
That young man that they highlighted in that article was riding with an Uber driver who told him to go to Summit. And within 20 weeks, he was earning $72,000 a year, even though he had been homeless. All right. Probably 2 years ago, he couldn't have gotten a job at US Bank. That's opportunity. That's the market at work.
Tell that story. Some people might not be aware of what.
So they were talking about how
this is the Star Tribune article.
The Star Tribune saying, well, we closed the gap. We were closing the gap on income, which is like finally. So we don't want the charity, we don't want crime. And they ended the story by speaking about a former Summit student who went homeless because their place burned down. And he was riding with an Uber driver and telling the story. And the Uber driver said, you need to go over to Summit. He went there for 20 weeks, no out-of-pocket costs, got a job as an app developer with US Bank, paying $72,000 a year. Boom. Now, that didn't just work for him. Think about the ant trail. That works for everybody he knows, because he's going to go back and say, you got it. That's how we did the construction industry, Mr. McFarlane, as you recall. Those young boys started joining. Now today they're business agents, they're foremen, they own their own businesses, because people are social. Here are the barriers that we have. A, the education system. We're undereducated, even though the opportunity exists, we're not prepared for it. Therefore, it's our responsibility to step up and do the job. Don't haggle with those people. They're not going to change. B, our own mindset. We've been bred to sit in the back seat, and I call it the Juneteenth moment. You're free, but you don't know it. And so you still act as if there's no opportunity, but there's a lot of opportunity out there. You just got to go out and get it, but somebody's got to come along and tell you, here's the opportunity, how to do it. Here's the ant trail. The third thing.
Let me stop you there and say emphasis on the word bread. You're saying it's not an accident.
Not an accident.
Nor is it your nature.
No, not at all.
But you have been programmed, you've been trained. It's like the elephant who is tethered to a stake, and he walks around and around and around and does that for so many years, maybe even generations.
You don't need the stake anymore.
You remove the chain, remove the stake, he still walks around the same circle. That's breeding.
You and I went to the same Trojan camp in Morehouse, right?
That's right.
When you walk out of there, you walk a certain way. You've been taught to walk a certain way and speak a certain way and do a certain thing. So you can be taught to be a consumer, to work all week, give all the money away. You can be taught to have a renter mentality because you never known anyone to have a home. That's not your fault, all right? In fact, over 70% of single-family detached in North Minneapolis is rental property, and that means the equity goes out of that community every month on the first, right? Which is why the sidewalks aren't shoveled, the lawns aren't mown. There's no ownership there. All right. So bread is the right word. Okay. Now, the third thing is your social network. And so you have education, attitude, and who you know. My grandmother used to say, baby, it ain't what you know, it's who you know. And I thought that was wrong because I thought I was really smart. Now I know my relationships are my most valuable asset. There are very few of us who are Donald Trumps. Let's just call it. Don't need anybody. Just do what you want to do. Most of us rely on other people to help us make our moves.
And but so does Donald. He just doesn't say it.
He just doesn't say it. All right, let's go that way. Right. But Lord have mercy. That's another game altogether.
Yep.
But for most of us, if all you see is people who pursue a minimum wage life and can't do any better and don't know any better, that's all that you know. And what I see forming now and what formed 100 years ago is once people see people around them making it, then the question becomes, hey, are they hiring down there? And someone said, yeah, well, will you help me get on? Yeah, as long as you don't come down here embarrassing me on these people's jobs, I'll get you in, and this is how you got to behave. The city with the least amount of African-American unemployment is Washington, D.C. You know why? Because they all work for the federal government. All right. And like in Detroit, everybody worked for Ford and GM, and that was the family way. And we're going to see that now. I'll end with this. As Susan talked about the future, I think we have another opportunity. I started a STEM district in North Minneapolis so we can get the children focused on science, technology, engineering, and math, and create a cohort of kids who are workers of the future, who see that as their way out rather than basketball, football, and entertainment. And so here's a moment. If you know 100 years from now, there are going to be more of us than there are today. Here's a moment we can say, okay, so what about Nike? Let's get some science experiments and math and make it fun and breed us some mathletes and breed us children who see the opportunity and who go after the opportunity, and we support them, and that'll be our ultimate contribution.
Susan Brower, just how tight is the labor market right now in Minnesota, and why is this observation really at a almost at an alarm level, something that we really have to pay extra attention to?
Yeah. So in Minnesota right now, there's more than 200,000 job openings, and it's been that way for about a year. And there are only about 63,000 people looking to fill those 200,000 jobs. So as Lewis said, this is a structural change in the opportunity structure. This is a foundational change for employers. They feel it now. It's been about a year. COVID disrupted things, but even before COVID hit, employers started feeling the panic and the pain of not having the people they needed to keep their businesses going. So when I share some of those numbers with employers, they get really frightened eyes. They're what are we going to do, going forward? But when I share those numbers with young people who have been marginalized in the past, they get kind of a glimmer. This is a different opportunity structure than we've had in the past. And I think, another thing that I thought was really great that you talked about, Lewis, was how we're still kind of waking up to this new reality. People who potentially want to be employed and employers are still realizing that this is how things are going to be moving forward. Just a really, really tight labor market, more jobs than we have people. And, something that's important to point out is all of these jobs, these 200,000 job openings, they're not all great jobs. In fact, a lot of these jobs are not great jobs. They're jobs that can't support a family. They're what I think of as maybe short-term good jobs, the kind of jobs that can get you by for a little while, but they're not the kind of thing that have a good trajectory. They're not the kind of thing that are going to get you to $70,000 or to a career path where you can fully support a family. A lot of these jobs are things that'll get you by to next week. They'll get you by maybe a month while you're looking for something else. But the pathway to those better paying jobs is not fully in place yet for a lot of folks. And I think that's the important work that Lewis has been doing, is moving people quickly into those pathways.
Well, that comes back to me, guys, to the question and the impact of immigration. And I'm looking backwards, and one of the things that I think I observed was a willingness of our state or of industry to not engage the assets, meaning human resources in the community, if those were Black or brown, but to willingly and systematically go, say, from Twin Cities up to the Iron Range, to Duluth, or the southern Minnesota, to import young white people to work in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and in a sense, ensure that there was no need to engage, to bring in Black people who were in the market who wanted to work. So there was a system of exclusion that included a strategy of importing people that they felt were culturally aligned or synonymous. And so you hear that expressed by our former president talking about creating national policy that favored bringing Europeans into America, while at the same time shutting the pipelines, the pathways to bring people that are not European into the country. And there's this double standard of elevating the value of the European culture, of white culture, and minimizing and denying or keeping it at bay at some way the natural growth. But the natural growth is happening anyway. You've described that, Susan Brower. Lewis, jump in. I mean, that's my observation. Modify that or challenge it.
Yeah. So back to Minnesota and politics, right? If you ask most Twin City folks where they're from Iowa, Wisconsin, North Dakota, or the Iron Range, or some of the town. That's the politics. We get beyond that. For those who want to believe that you can simply attract people away from other countries, try it. Everybody's having the same problem. We're united. Am I wrong, Dr. Brown?
I'd say that's true of European countries, yeah,
right.
But not other countries. Yeah.
Well, Japan has some issues, but
yeah,
Japan, because they're so homogeneous. But back to Europe, they're aging too. Okay, so just and so you're gonna suck their people, and then what happens to that, right?
Yeah.
And
their communities are being changed by the former colonies.
You
got
they
dominated now have come to the home country, and they
got
a
black guy with the
problem.
British accent, right? He goes, "Wow, where'd you learn to talk like that?" He was born in London, right? I think that one of the things we have to face, and it's really hard when I talk to my colleagues who are in the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion space, is also the corporations. We can get the people to you, but then how you treat them when they get there is important as them having the skills. You can't tell me 100% of my people are bad, all right? Chances are they got a bad boss or there's a bad culture. I think that the next thing we got to do is ensure that the companies, and this is the work I think that Tawana Black is doing, have the environment that allow for me to be different. So I was on a call this morning, a national call, right? And they started talking about how did you what gifts did you get for Christmas or something. I got to go back and talk to the people and say, hey, everybody doesn't celebrate Christmas. So how are you going to ask them to answer that question? Okay, they're Muslim.
Yeah, that was the icebreaker question, right?
That was the icebreaker question, right? But and this was a black person that did that. All right. So I thought that was a great example, because when you bring someone into an organization, they got to feel that they're a part of that organization in order to make their maximum contribution and to encourage others to join them. All right. We're not there yet. Now, that part I know we're not there yet. But once we get once you get a certain number of people in an organization, then you start to see change, because the gravity shifts. The greater challenge, I think, is how do we ensure that the people who need the opportunity are aware of it and prepared for it. And I think we're still in the infancy stages of that, because policy has not caught up with the need in the field. No one really saw, even though Susan and company were talking about it for like 20 years, running around going, with the demographic shift, everybody's going, that's somebody else. Now it's upon you. And I think our policies have to catch up to make sure that those people know about the opportunities and have them. And about the low-wage jobs, that was a question about the jobs. When I was in school, I worked low-wage jobs. I've sold water softeners at Sears. You do what you have to do while you get the skills to move up. I wouldn't expect you to wash dishes for the rest of your life, but if that's going to get your foot in the door and you learn how to work, going to work every day is a skill. It's a discipline. It takes a certain amount of energy and a certain amount of wherewithal to go do that. You have to train yourself to do it, because if you're just used to lying there and waiting on the mail to come or playing video games, so there's something to be said for work, period, just as a lifestyle. And then how you navigate that to move up in the world becomes the next question.
Lewis, I always remember you talking about the phrase you used to use was money being left on the table. And I want you to bring that into this conversation because when you talked about construction, you talked about a time when in history, maybe 1% or less than 1% of even public contracting building jobs was awarded to Black or other construction companies of color. And so while this was our money, meaning taxpayers' money, going to use in development of growth in business and profitability, we were being excluded both as companies and as workers. And you said that, what the law is moving towards is an intent that 35% of Minnesota's contracts on these certain projects be channeled through Black and other BIPOC companies and or workers. And absent that, $1 billion investment or spend that doesn't track with 35% engagement to Black and BIPOC means we're being robbed again. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I don't even know. I was overwhelmed by when I learned that you had these participation goals and no one took them seriously. There were three problems.
Mm-hmm.
The contractors didn't take them seriously. The government looked at it and it was a paper drill, and the community wasn't prepared, all right, to do it. And the politicians were lined up with the unions because the unions walk around with suitcases full of money, getting everybody reelected. So they would ask me, what do the unions think about what you have to say? And I told them, well, I don't care about that. I want to know what you think.
Mm-hmm.
But the issue was one of entitlement. And it's back to that elephant that you talked about. The businesses had gotten used to filling in the blanks and saying, well, we tried.
Mm-hmm.
The government had gotten used to saying, well, they tried.
Good faith.
And the unions, which got used saying, we doing the best we can. We can't find it.
And here's your money.
Yeah, right.
And here's your contribution. Yeah.
Here's your money. And the community was like, well, they won't hire any of us. As you recall, we disrupted that paradigm by taking 200 people over to the state capitol, showing up at the city council, and turning loose 100 African-American men who had discipline and skills. And then suddenly the doors of the church were open, and our crowning achievement was, of course, the U.S. Bank Stadium, where we exceeded the goals and all the quality was there. Where was the lesson in this? The lesson was there, and this is today also. Even though the opportunity is on the table, as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without demand.
Mm-hmm.
And demand isn't just about protest. You've got to show up. You've got to show up in order to force the issue. And I think that that's something we got to get better at, because back to being bred and being programmed, if we think that all the solutions lie through additional programs, then we miss the boat. Mm-hmm. When really what we should be talking about is what David McGee is doing in that Build Wealth thing. That is a powerful tool.
Mm-hmm.
And we should be getting everybody that we can to get into entrepreneurial classes, to learn how to start businesses, and technology and infrastructure. Infrastructure is so important. If you look at California right now, mm-hmm. they haven't even rebuilt Florida yet. Tornado season is coming, and that's construction, and we don't have enough people. So there's huge opportunity there, but we can't leave the money on the table.
Susan, let me ask you to jump in here. What do you think our state is doing? I know you're the demographer. You're not in charge of admin or MMB or hiring anywhere, but you are in that arena. What do you see happening in the state to address the question of responding to the needs that are a result of the demographic shift? How do you see this door opening up and us being both prepared and willing to invite, engage, accept, and grow the presence of BIPOC people in state government, and as it happens there, in the corporate and retail sectors as well. What do you think?
So I'm going to answer that as a state employee and my experience as a state employee. And I happen to be in the Department of Admin, so I have a little bit more, which happens to do the purchasing and kind of setting the rules for purchasing for the state of Minnesota. But so I'll speak just to what I have seen in the last few years that's different. I've been with state government for 10 years. And I think the big change came in the summer of 2020 with the murder of George Floyd. I think that is when people shifted and took kind of the institutionalization of racist policies seriously. I'm not saying that they're in a place now where it's solved, obviously, but I'm saying I saw a pivot at that point where now it is not it's not acceptable to shrug your shoulders and say, well, we tried. Sorry, we'll try again this year, another year. What we see now is more uncomfortable and painful training of employees to understand where their own policies and behaviors are throwing up some of those barriers that people of color experience when coming to the state, not maybe as vendors, but also as employees. And then I see a movement toward a more commitment to have a wider lens on, that was so many words. I think people are moving in the right direction, but I think we're still a long way away. And I feel like genuinely there's a commitment there that I hadn't seen before. What happened with George Floyd and kind of the reckoning after that. That's just my observation as an employee.
Louis, I think our personal stories are important, and you've got a great personal story. I always enjoy hearing you talk about what motivated you, what your parents held for you as expectations, and how you and when you embraced those and achieved them and exceeded them. So take a minute, if you would, Louis King, and just tell your story, because I think it inspires and instructs us all to move forward in a very positive, productive, effective way.
Certainly, and thank you. I refuse to ever let people refer to poor Black folks as disadvantaged, marginalized, underserved, underprivileged, because I'm living proof of what can be accomplished to a kid who was born to 2 dropouts, found on the streets by himself at 3, in special ed by the 3rd grade. I can go on and on and on, right? We've got relatives in prison for life, real close relatives, all of that. But now one of my daughters is a PhD, another one an MBA. I got a third one who was going to be an artist, but now she is an entrepreneur, and it's really fun to watch her. What made the difference for me was having people along the way who wouldn't let me be my own worst enemy, and saw something in me and encouraged me and held me to high standards. You observed me build Summit, and I insisted that those young men take off their hats, pull up their pants. You're not a thug. Why do you want to look like one, act like one? Why you want people to be afraid of you? You and I have on these hoodies, but we're shirt and tie guys. All right. And and then I was a soldier for 10 years. So I got a certain skill set, and of course, Morehouse. So I'm well trained in how to practice my craft. And I take a great deal of pride in what I do. I view what we do today as important as leading the Underground Railroad or leading in the Civil Rights Movement. Struggle evolves. Okay, so there are no sheets, there are no chains. It's all institutional stuff. So you need institutional fighters to come and take it on. And I went home to my 45th high school reunion here recently, and everybody's retired, and they asked me, how at 62 am I taking on a new job? I'm like, well, when you look at Nancy Pelosi and those people, I'm a spring chicken.
Yep. That's my attitude. I look at what's his name, Larry King.
Yeah.
Old as water. I got some years ahead of me.
And having fun. We're having fun. They've
Exactly.
extended our shelf life. And I said, God, why you wait till I'm 62? And you wasn't ready yet, right?
Mhm.
And so, and the demographic shift hadn't occurred, and the pandemic hadn't occurred, and you didn't have Instacart and DoorDash and Zoom. Now's the time. Are you ready? And so it's fun.
Let's look at that. Talk about, Louis, if you would, the strategy, the work that you are sort of interpolating to the national level through OICs of America. How does that play out? You got this body of knowledge and of experience and of networks, and not only the networks and the relationships, but the process of attaining, creating, and maintaining those relationships that you now can apply in other arenas, nationally, internationally. To talk about the work of OICs of America. And then finally, if you would, and this is my thing, Louis, how do we use our learnings and our knowledge and our access here, such as it is, to engage our people in the Caribbean, in South America, in Africa and Europe? Is there a reason to think of ourselves in a diaspora way that provides benefit to us individually as our families, but also to our country? So it's not a contradiction.
So as I said a minute ago, our epic journey is helping this nation fulfill the promise of life living in the pursuit of happiness. All right. Until we get it, the promise is not fulfilled. Okay. Let's begin with that in mind. This is just not just selfish. This benefits everyone. And I knew we had built something special at Summit, but it was difficult for me to go to people and say, help me replicate this. They tell me get in line behind all the other good ideas. Now that I represent over 5,000 people a year and we're growing to 8, hey, people look at it differently. So I can take the processes, products that we have here and take my guy in Menlo Park or Portland or New Britain, Connecticut, and say, you don't need to invent that here, do it here. And then the entire community benefits because we just gave them a body of language. It's interesting that you mentioned the international aspect. On Friday, I have a meeting with OIC International to talk about how we can partner, and I can bring this stuff to them because this conversation could easily be beamed to South Africa, okay, or the Bahamas, or Jamaica, or anywhere. So knowledge, you don't have to be there. What we learned during the pandemic was that you don't have to be there to learn, and you don't have to be there to work. And this will speed up. This will accelerate the economic emancipation of poor people. Because to Susan's point, it doesn't make any sense if the majority of the people are dead broke. The society can't function. Your tax base will crumble. Your businesses won't do well. We got to ensure that everyone does well. And that's not just here. Because if we don't take care of the other countries, they'll be lined up at the border down south, all right?
Well, as you say, the mission for us here is to make sure America gets it right. And in doing so, we really heal and make America true to its promise. We move it towards fulfillment. I say that America really has the same mission in the world. It can have it. And so to the degree that we're successful in bringing reality to the promise of democracy, also we find the degree of possibility of America bringing freedom and democracy and human dignity to the entire world where it doesn't exist, and bolstering it, helping refine it globally so that we change the paradigm, we change the narrative, and we figure out a way that we can live based on growing knowledge, sharing knowledge, increasing opportunity for people to contribute, to work, to live wherever they are around the world in a sense and spirit of dignity, using technology that affords us that opportunity to make a living.
Exactly.
And do well.
Imagine the internet when Harriet Tubman was running the Underground Railroad. If she'd had the internet, right?
Right. Hit a button.
Wow.
Hit the return key, and it's done.
It was
Listen,
done.
guys, thank you so much. Susan Brower, Minnesota's demographer, thank you for being here. Thank you for your work.
Thanks
I
for
want to
having
keep
me.
inviting you back because I think this is an important conversation for me. It's a question of continuing to put in our public mind vocabularies, allowing us to create words that chronicle our inevitable success and chronicle the idea that that success is imminent. It is at hand right now. This is the moment. Louis King, thank you for what you're doing, what your work is. We
Great
appreciate
job.
you. You got 30 seconds. A final word, invitation, suggestion.
The best social service program in the world is a job.
I knew you were going to say that. That's great. Susan, last words.
Oh, it's just been great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, great to have both of you as well. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation. I want to invite our listeners on KFAI to support this program, support the station, and support this program. The way you can support this program, The Conversation, is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our mission right now is to grow our presence on YouTube. We've got around maybe 200, 300 subscribers at the moment. Our short-term goal is 1,000 subscribers. If you're listening on KFAI right now or on any of those digital channels, switch over to YouTube and subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it means you'll be getting the notices of whenever we go live, what we do in the community, and we're going to build this together. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.